Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of How It's Made. In this episode we're going to be looking at the very first game I made for the 1 week game series, and that is the memory match game. If you don't remember that game, this is kind of how it plays out. So that's kind of the game, how it kind of works and all that stuff. So the main idea of this is going to be to show you how I kind of created everything and stuff like that. So I'm going to just be showing you all of the code in this video so that you can either use it in your own games or just kind of get an understanding of how I created this game myself. So let's open up some scripts here, and there's going to be a few that I want to talk about. So our board creator, the card, the combat log, the icon holder, the game manager, and the enemy. Everything else is kind of like, there's other YouTube videos for that, or you can kind of figure it out on your own. They're not too difficult. But let's start with our board creator. So I think in the very first episode I kind of talked a little bit on how I kind of created this. So here are all of my variables. I'll kind of talk about what they each are and what they do, and then I'll show you the rest of the code. So we have first our rows and columns. So this is a 3x3 grid that I was making, so I kind of did something like this. They honestly shouldn't be static. You could instead here put in const. That just means that const means they're going to be constantly that value. I kind of don't know why I put in static. It was a brain fart moment, but either const, or you can honestly just keep them as private values as well. That should be just fine. The next is the space. So that's going to be just the space between each card. Of course we need a prefab to the card base. And then I like to store all of my cards into a board, so that's kind of what this game object list is. And then I have a win canvas, so something to show like your options when you win. And then I have two of each different icons, so I have 4 different things that you can match. So this kind of just helps with making sure we have pairs of every icon. Next I also have a selected card. I think that goes hand in hand with my board here. And then I have a array of size 2 that will compare my 2 cards that I picked, which we'll kind of get into the card area for that. And then I also have a number for matches, so for those enemies that have more than like 4 health, I need to reset the matches so that I can reset the board, which I'll show you a little bit later as well. And then I have a sprite renderer for my background, because depending on the wave or level that you're on, the background changes, which is what this little array here is doing. This is my sprite array for the backgrounds. So when we start this board creator, we check in my game manager here if we've beaten 10 levels. If we have, then we're going to just switch the background to be the first one in that array. So every time you play this level, it's the same level, so the background is always the same, unless you have beaten 10 levels. Then we switch the background to whatever my first one is in the array, and if you got to the end, so you're on level 20, then it switches to that last one in the array. I also just hide the win canvas because of course you don't want players to click on that. And for good practice, I also create a new list for my board, just so that it's a fresh new list whenever we start our level. And then we go into some functions here that help us just kind of initialize our board. So I do this build board. Pretty much all it is a double for loop for my rows and columns. And then I just instantiate that card, and I also add it to my board. So my board will always know exactly which cards are in it. And that's where that space comes in. I use it for both X and Y axis, just so that it can be in the right spot between any of the cards. So that's kind of all of that. Next, now that we've built the board, the cards are just default, they have nothing on them. So we need to also randomize the icons. So what I do is I put the skull in first. So I kind of look through my board and I pick one by random. So I do a random range between 0 and however many cards are in my board. I then set that number, so let's say it's like 2. Then my board at 2 will be type skull. And then it's also going to change that board at, let's say 2. It's icon sprite, so just what it looks like. It's then going to be my 7th icon, which is in my icon holder, which I'll show you that a little bit later on too. Once our skull is in, then we look to see how we can place our other icons. So for icon 1, I think this one is the green diamond, the emerald. They used to be weapons, and I just did not rename them, but it should all work the exact same. So I have an int for the same kind of thing as my skull, between 0 and the total amount of board, the total amount of cards, I mean. And if that type is none, so there's nothing in that card, then we assign it to our sword, and then we also assign its icon to be the first icon. And then we can also subtract that from this. So then this is how we actually make sure that we're getting 2. So if you remember from the top, icon was equal to 2. So once it places our first emerald, then it'll subtract 1 and do this all over again until it places the second one. And then it will break the while loop, because then icon is equal to 0. So then we've placed all of our diamond, or all of our emeralds. Now we can go on to our rubies, or onto our whatever. So that's just 4 different while loops, all kind of built back to back on each other. Next, we want to hide our icons. So now that we've assigned them, we want to make sure that they just are invisible to the player. So pretty much all I do is do a for loop through my board, and any icons that are enabled, we just make them disabled, so make them enabled equal false. And the only thing is, if we actually can see the skull, so you picked that option that you win and you beat an enemy and you pick I want to see the skull, then we actually make sure that that one is enabled, so then we do see that skull. Next here is our selected cards. So when we click on our cards, we add to our selected cards number. Once that equals 2, then we go into a coroutine here. And in this coroutine, we reset our selected cards back to 0. And if our first card is not the same type as our second card, then we do all of this stuff here. We send to our combat log that we missed. We also increase our misses here in our game manager. We can play a sound effect as well, and then I wait a couple of seconds, and then I reset my 2 cards, and I make sure they're both unselected again as well. So this hides them, and then this will deselect them. And then we kind of look to see if our enemy deals damage, which we'll get to that part in a second. The deal damage, I think, is just a random range, and if it hits it, then we deal damage. So if it does do that, then we take damage. And then if our health is less than or equal to 0, that does mean we lose. And we kind of just save our minutes and seconds, and we load to our next level. And then regardless, again, all of our selected cards go back to 0, and we make sure these 2 are null, so that when we click on cards, they are set to game objects. If we match, it's kind of similar. We then add to our matches. We also, these are just like variables on the side that hold like how many hits and misses you have. But then we can subtract health from our enemy. This, I think, just plays its a little effect so that it flashes red. We also send a message to our combat log, play some sort of sound effect, And then we also play the fireworks from the card as well. And if we've beaten the enemy, so its health is less than 0, then we just play its little dead animation and we activate our win canvas. And then here, if our matches equal 4, so we've matched all the cards we can on our board, and our enemy is still alive, so its health is more than 0, then we reset the board and reset our matches. So the last part in here, I'm pretty sure our reset board, there's actually one more part, is while our board is bigger than 0, we're going to destroy each card and then also remove it. And then wait just a little bit of time just so that the next card can kind of come out, or they kind of disappear one at a time, so it kind of gives a cool effect. And then we reset all of our icons. And then we just go back to that build board and randomize the icons and hide the icons. So all the same stuff from our start, we just do again right here in our reset board. Lastly, the random event. This pretty much is just helping with that random event stuff. So if you got the first random event, then we kind of randomize which matches you're already at so that we can reset the board on you earlier. This is our reveal card here, so when you click the reveal a card, then whatever, it does that. And then this is lastly our reveal all icons, which just kind of goes again through the whole board, shows all the icons, and then hides them all. And then in our update, all we want to do is know about our selected cards. So that was a pretty long explanation for the board creator, but that's more or less how that works. Next, let's go into our cards. So these are going to be each prefab object. So the sprite renderer in here is the icon. We want to know if we have selected it or not. We also want to know what type of icon it is. And then we want a particle effect for fireworks. And then we also have an animator to make it go back and forth when it's being idle. So just because these things are all prefabs, it is pretty nice to do this, so you can always set your classes here to whatever component you're trying to use. So like if I had my particle system on the card like as a component, then I could also do like fireworks equal get component particle system. That works too. I could have done it here with my icon, so icon equals get component sprite renderer. In our update here, we then just want to see if our enemy's health is less than or equal to 0. If it is, then we want to disable all of the hitboxes on them, so you can't accidentally click on anything. We're always setting the animation bool on our thing to be selected, so whether you click on it or not, then it's going to just know about how to set the boolean for our animation here. So if the selected is true and the icon's enabled, this I think was just a failsafe. Sometimes the icon wouldn't go away, so this was just to make sure that it would go away, even if by accident it was selected, but the icon wasn't showing. And this is the bread and butter to the card. So we just want to know if our type is skull and we're not paused, then we're going to lose some health. And then this is again just our lose condition right here. So if our health is less than 0, then do all that lose stuff. Otherwise here, we want to make sure if our card hasn't been selected, if we're not in the pause menu, and our board collector or board creator doesn't have both cards selected, then what we're going to do is if our first card picked is null, so that first selected card hasn't been picked, then we're going to make it this card. We're going to enable the icon, and just for myself I printed the type. Else, So the first card was picked, but the second card wasn't picked, then same thing, we make that card this object and show its icon. And then just to make sure all of this works, we also just increase our selected cards for the board creator. And then we also want to make sure that this card has been selected so that we can't reselect it. The next thing I kind of want to show you is the combat log. This I think I touched on in, I think it was the second episode of this whole thing. So this pretty much just is that little message board on the side and how all of that worked. So I have like a maximum amount of messages I want to be on my board at any time. So if it goes over 10, then it's just going to delete the oldest message. And then I have two game objects that I want access to. The text object is the prefab of the text, and then the chat panel is the board that I'm actually sending all the text to. And then I just have a list of all of the messages too. And then what you might have noticed, I think in the board creator or the card, I had some send message to log things. So this is what that is doing. So it's taking in a string text, which is going to be the name or the sentence or whatever. And then it's also taking in some damage, because I want to know who's dealing this damage. And this first part is just seeing if we're already at our max amount of messages. Well, let's just delete the first message so that we have room for the new message. Then we create that new message. And we want to make sure our new message from this, its text is going to be the text that we're passing through our message log here. We're then going to spawn a new text, and we're going to be putting it right into our chat panel. And then we're going to make sure that the text object that we created, it's going to make sure that it's getting the component of the spawned text, and then we're just assigning that text to be whatever message was kind of passed in here. This next little part is more just for fun, so if it was a miss on both sides, then I made sure the color was white. If the enemy attacked, I believe, that's when I made the text color red, and if we hit, then I think we made the text color green. And then the very last thing was just add that message to the list. This, I think you could do it before setting the colors. And again, you don't have to set the colors. This was just something I thought was kind of fun to do. Lastly, you'll also need this system serializable public class message. This is going to be the actual thing that we use to kind of just help with storing and moving that data of the text and the text object. So the next part is our icon holder. This one really just holds two enums. So it holds the type that we want of our cards. So you can see I had like a whole bunch of things in here. Unfortunately, I think like most of it wasn't used, like half of them weren't used. And that's just because I thought when creating this game I was going to have you have like different icons, so it wasn't just the same four the whole time. But the logic of that was starting to get a little convoluted, especially with the very simple way I was assigning what icon was where. So I kind of decided to not use all of them, and then I think I just used from none until mace or something like that as my types. So when cards were spawned, they always had type none, and then they were assigned their appropriate type. And then of course the skull was assigned skull. And then I also have an enum for all of my enemy types. So these are all the different enemies in here. That's again just so that each enemy knows how much health they have, what's their hit chance, stuff like that. And then lastly, I have two sprite arrays of all of these things, just so that I can grab it from this icon holder and assign it dynamically to my cards or enemies at runtime. Next, let's go into the enemy, and then we'll finish off with the game manager. So in our enemy here, we have a whole bunch of stuff. We have the enemy name, of course. We have a slider to its health bar. We have some text to its health as well to just tell you, what it is. We also have the enemy's type. We keep track of its current and max health. We have an array of enemy sprites. And then we have our sprite renderer here, just so we can assign what sprite it is. They have a little bit of an animator as well, so we have that. And then we also have a damage chance. So in our start, we just assign the two things that we need. So everyone needs the animator and everyone needs the sprite. And then we roll our determine enemy. We also do the health bar stuff here, which is very simple. But we determine our enemy right here as well. So the way that we do it here is based on how many matches we've won. So if we haven't beaten more than 5 rounds, then our damage chance for the enemy is going to be pretty low. It's going to be 1 in 5. And we choose between just 2 enemies. This one's kind of hidden up here. If the random enemy is 0, then it's going to be Poison Shroom. If it's 1, then it's going to be Space Invader. And then we just assign kind of what their stuff is here. Next, if we're between round 5 and 10, then our damage chance against us goes up a little bit. And we then have 2 different enemies to kind of choose between, our Cherry Bomb and the Skeleton. And then the next is between 10 and 15, which then we have 2 new ones. The damage chance, I kind of kept it the same at 4. Lastly, if you're in the last 5 rounds, then you can pick any random enemy. So you have any enemy can hit you. Again, the damage chance is still 4, just because I didn't want you to die instantly when you got to this round. And then all the previous ones kind of come back too, with a little bit more health, just so that you have to reset the board. And I'll slowly kind of go through all this. And then our last enemy is when you've reached round 20, you fight Steve. And Steve is a pretty hard character, but if you've played the game before, you may or may not have beat him. And then in our update, all we do is we update the values. So we just update the health bar value to be whatever the enemy's current health is. And we also just update the text of the health to be its HP plus whatever current health is out of our max health. And then this is our deal damage. So we have a chance for our connecting hit. So as you saw up here, we have our damage chance, which gets assigned based on which enemy you're fighting. So you have a 0 to, let's say, 4 chance to get that. And only if it's 0, then we shake your camera a little, you take some damage, and then we also send that to the combat log. And then if it does take damage, the enemy takes damage, then we just play the hurt animation, wait a second, and then turn that off. The last part that I want to show you is the game manager. So the game manager is a singleton, which means that it's going to be able to be accessible from any class without needing to be referenced. And it will also go between all of the scenes. So the way we do that is you create a public static of your class, and then you can call that whatever you want. I usually call it instance. And then on awake, what you want to do is you want to see if your scene already has an instance. If it does, then just destroy this game manager because you already have one. Otherwise, this game manager is going to be your instance, and then don't destroy it on load so it goes between all the scenes. We then have a bunch of different variables in here. So we have, if we can see the skull, that's one of our random events. We have our player health here as well, because we want that to go between every scene. We need to also know how many matches we've won, if we're allowing the player to shake the camera, what our game's volume is, what our minutes and seconds are for when you lose the game, and also what our hits and misses are, so you can keep track of those stats as well. And then I also have a random event integer here, where I kind of wrote out all the things and what they do. So 0 does nothing, which is what it starts off as. And then 1 will shuffle the board, 2 will reveal a card, 3 will show all the icons, 4 will full heal. I then have some music variables as well. So instead of using like a mixer and stuff like that, I just did it all kind of in my scripts. So this kind of has our menu music and then also all of our other musics here. And pretty much when you lose the game or you restart the game or whatever, we also run this reset stats just because, just so that you start the game fresh every time. Next, in our update, we want to make sure all of our volume is going to equal whatever our game volume was set at. This probably isn't the best way to do that, but for very small, simple games like this, it works just fine. I then see what scene we're in. So if we're in our main menu here, which is the 0 scene, then we want to see, is that music playing? If it isn't, then we're going to play it, and we're going to make sure all the other music stop. And then same for pretty much every single different area. And that's pretty much all of the code. So definitely stop the video at certain spots if you need to see what is what. I'll also now just show you kind of some of the prefabs so you know exactly what the heck I was talking about for certain things. So we go back to the game here. I'm going to show you my prefabs here. So we have our card base here. So this is the card script on it. So I have the fireworks here. This is the icon, as you can see. So this is what I switch on my card base here. So I have that referenced here as the icon, so that depending on what it is, I can just switch that and it'll work perfectly fine. And then it also knows about all the different types as well. So that's pretty much the card base there. Let's go back into the scene. Again, the combat log is just a scroll rectangle, which I kind of believe it's a UI object that you can use too. I think it's the scroll view. So if you use scroll view, then boom, you're pretty much going to get the combat log right away. And then I just have combat log on it with the combat text. It is literally just a text object from a canvas, just a text object. And then the content, which is in your scroll view, in the viewport, this content, it's kind of this background here. So just make sure that they spawn in properly here. Let's click on the enemy too. So I do have all the different enemy sprites here on it. Its name, its health bar, which all of that stuff is over here. The animator, the damage chance, these things don't need to be filled in because we have in the start, the get component for those. And of course its types are all here as well. And then this is our game board as well. So you can kind of see everything is in here. So when I hit play, let's just actually like mute the audio for a second. And if I hit play here, you'll see that when I click on this, it will now become the first element to my picked cards. The board is all made of my card base clones, and you can see then they go away, kind of like that. So I hope this video was somewhat informative. If you did like this video, then consider liking the video and subscribing to the page. I'm going to be releasing one of these every week. Just a quick kind of talk about the game and how to kind of create some of the basics of it and stuff like that. But yeah, other than that, I hope you learned something, and you can use this code in your own games to kind of create your own kind of memory game. And I'll see you in the next video next time.